The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live on this December morning. I can't believe how lucky I am because look who I'm sitting next to, Dr. Jonathan Tarbox. It's been a month of Sundays, right?
Yes, it's been way too
More
long.
than that,
Way
probably. But welcome back to Autism Live.
Thank you so much.
And we're so excited that he's here with us today because we're going to talk about a lot of different things. And you guys can be writing in with your questions. I'm going to go through all of that in a second. We're going to do Jargon of the Day, a new one with Dr. Tarbox. Which is very exciting to me, and I said I'm nervous. I'm a little giddy and I'm a little bit nervous, but it's very exciting to have you here. Welcome.
Yeah, it's so good to see you, Shannon. Like literally, I mean, I've told you this a million times, but every minute that I spend with you, like, actually makes my life a little bit better. You're just like all heart and love, and just you're one of the most inspirational people in my career, honestly.
Well, you're gonna make me sob before we get very far.
True.
I didn't do your bio, so can I read your bio?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So this is Dr. Jonathan Tarbox, and he is a professor, mindfulness researcher, that's a wonderful title, and director of the Master of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis program at the University of Southern California, as well as the director of research at First Steps for Kids. His life's work involves research and practice in areas that help people thrive during times of stress and discomfort. Dr. Tarbox has published 5 books in psychology, over 90 scientific articles and chapters, and served as editor-in-chief of the scientific journal Behavior Analysis and Practice. It's all so impressive. His practical work revolves around supporting children and families, as well as teaching adults skills that help us connect with deeper meaning and purpose in the context of life's struggles. Compassion and social justice are the compass that guide Dr. Tarbox's work. Dr. Tarbox is proud to have multiple neurodivergent family members, and is working hard to become a more effective ally to the autism community. It's very concise, and I think it describes you to a T. Oh. Because in the time that I have known you, which I'm proud to say has been a long
Quite a while.
time. Like what, like seriously, like maybe 17, 18 years?
It could be, I think so,
yeah.
maybe.
That this is always the space that you've come from, that you've always been in a space about understanding, listening, and being effective at helping people to get to better lives that are meaningful to them, and not about the BS. About does it look good, does it sound good, does it quack, how much money can be made off of it. You're, a very pure person.
Thank you.
Am I allowed to say that? Because I think I can say it. I know you probably can't say it, but Dr. Tarbox was part of our team.
Sure, of course.
When we were treating our son. You guys, and there were a lot of years that you were a regular, a weekly regular on Autism Live. But before that, you were just this person who was common sense on our team. I've told the story many times about when Jem was hitting me. And that I came in one day for our clinic and I said I need help, which was hard. And if anybody is being hit, it's so hard, right? To admit that your child is hitting you. I hid it for a long time, but I had the guts, because I knew something bad was gonna happen. If I didn't say something, I had the guts to say I need help, and they brought you down, and you were infinite help. And I had met you briefly before that, but you just have this presence about you, and you are this, vessel about the truth and figuring it out that is truly lovely, which has just been a huge guiding light for me. So I'm a huge fan, can you tell? Anyway, I had to take care of some business here at the top. I want to welcome everybody. If you're watching us, we are live right now. It is Monday. I don't know what the date is. What's the date today? Is it the 18th? It's the 18th.
Yeah,
it's Monday, December
right.
18th, 2023. If you're watching live, you have the opportunity right now to be writing in You can find us. We're live right now on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and about a dozen other sites. We hope that you will write in on any of those platforms. I have the ability to see live questions. Susie B is already saying hello. Autism Journey with Elijah is saying, wow, love this so much, very impressive. I know, wait till you hear him talk too. I'm gonna let him talk too in a minute. But I'm so glad that you guys are here, and anybody else who wants to write in, you can. I really encourage you to be able to be a part of the conversation. That's why we do the shows live, because it's just more fun.
Much more fun, yeah.
And we have a whole bunch of stuff to talk about, but Dr. Tarbox said he'd be willing to take questions. So feel free, you guys, go ahead, lob them over.
Yes, definitely.
But I also want to say that later on, the show will be available as a podcast. It will always be available on YouTube. In fact, you can go back and watch some of the older shows on YouTube. I think the most popular one, we were talking about this the other day, is that you did a thing about a research study about brushing teeth.
Yeah,
and there's so many comments that come on a regular basis on that one.
People still email me a lot about the video clip, more than they email me about the article.
Why? Why about the video clip?
They come across it and they're inspired by it or whatever, and so they email me and they ask for more practical resources. And then I send them the article.
That's
so it's like a great way to direct people to the research.
Yeah,
really cool.
Absolutely. And but there's so many wonderful videos that, like, even though it's many years later, they still stand up beautifully. You can be checking out all the things that Dr. Tarbox has done with us in the past. But you can write in questions now. But if you're watching us, so there's two different ways. Well, actually, there's three different ways. What am I saying? So you can be watching the show live. You can watch it recorded on YouTube and get picture and sound, or you can get the podcast, which is sound only.
Okay.
And if you get the podcast that's sound only, you will see that there are advertisements. You will hear that there are advertisements. And we hope that you embrace that, because that's what makes it possible for us to make that a free download for you. Now, some of you have written to us and said, I appreciate that. There's a cost to it, but I'd rather pay the cost myself than have to listen to the ads, because I'm busy. I have things to do. And we heard you, so there is a way that you can pay for it yourself and get it ad-free. If you go to glow.fm/autism-live, you can pay, it's $5 a month, but if you decide to buy it across a year, it's even less expensive, because there is a charge every time they run your card, so we pass that savings on to you. So check that out if that's something that interests you. And by the way, when you do that on glow.fm, you not only get Autism Live, but you get Ask Dr. Doreen as well, free of ads. So in fact, you get everything that we do at the Autism Network. So that's wonderful. I also want to give the programming note that tomorrow is the last show of the year. We are having Ask Dr. Doreen with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh. And I am giving her a gift. I hope she's not watching right now, that has comments. We've had a lot of notes from many of you, but if you still want to get in on that and have your note be a part of the gift to her, you should write to me, Shannon, at autism-live.com as soon as possible, because I will have to wrap it today. So if you have a note for Dr. Doreen, please send that over my way. And if you have other questions, you can always reach me, Shannon, at autism-live.com. Okay. We've taken care of business.
Okay, very good.
But can we start with business for you, because you've been involved with something pretty impressive. We shared a little bit about it, I think, in October. I love this project that you were doing with one of your grad students. That's now, she's all graduated now, right?
Almost. She's about to get her PhD. Yeah.
And in fact, I just firmed up with her today that she's going to come on and talk more about this on January 8th.
Great.
In fact, our first show back.
Nice.
When we come back in the new year. But tell everybody what it's called and what it is and how they could sign up.
Yeah, definitely. It's called STAND, and it's a project that is about empowering families of newly diagnosed children. And so it's an 8-week program that takes place all on Zoom, and it's 1 hour a week for 8 weeks, and it's a support group and a parent training group. And it connects families with resources. So resources for public school, ABA services, other services, and it's about just empowering families and closing the diagnosis to support gap, right? There's a huge gap between when you get the diagnosis and when you actually get access to real meaningful supports. And so her life's work as a young researcher is about empowering families during that really difficult time. And so it's a randomized control trial, so everyone will get assigned to either immediate intermediate parent support group or delayed parent support group, but everybody gets the full access to the full program. Nobody's getting a placebo or anything like that.
Right.
And so, the next cohort starts in late January or early February, so we really encourage people to sign up right now because space is very limited. We keep the group small so that the families get a really intimate, high-quality experience.
And this is limited to families in California, is that correct?
It is limited to California,
but it's virtual, so you can be in San Francisco and do it.
Anywhere in California.
But anywhere in California, and you're doing this study, but the basic premise is what? What is it that you're hoping to find from this?
Several things. We're trying to empower families with knowledge about creating more peace in their interactions with their child. So if they're having challenging behavior issues, tantrums, things like that, we're teaching some very basic skills for just turning down the heat on all of that and empowering their children to communicate to get what they want rather than having a tantrum. And then we're doing ACT training, acceptance and commitment training skills for the parents themselves to help them cope with their stress level and be a little more present and a little bit less stuck in their heads. And then connection with practical resources. So literally like where you go to get connected with an ABA program or insurance funding, that kind of stuff. And then it's also a support group. So there's other parents. So we really encourage the parents to help each other out and we connect the parents with each other. So those are basically all of the pieces of the package, and what we're hoping will change will be kids will get connected with services faster, parent distress will go down, and just sort of like family joy will go up because they're spending less time stressed out and more time just tuned into the present moment and enjoying the moment with their kids.
Yeah. Well, and I think anytime I'm someplace with you, and I've sat with you sometimes, I'll be at a conference and you'll say, you got to come to this one, Shannon, and come and sit. And it's always about how and studies keep coming out that show this clearly, that if the parents take care of themselves, it's ridiculous when you think about it. You go, oh, well, that does make sense, doesn't it? It's that duh that we always used to talk about, that they do science and then you go, well, duh. But it's important because there's proof showing that if parents take care of themselves and if parents have less stress, the kids do better. Absolutely, absolutely. And it seems like a magic trick, but when you think about it, it does make great sense.
No, it does. And I'll just be honest, like the number one Achilles heel from 25 years of working with parents, the number one Achilles heel that parents have is making it only about their kids. And so they totally sacrifice their own well-being and their own health. And like you said, you cannot be your most effective parent if you're just killing yourself to only make your whole world about your child. And also, this is kind of a tough pill to swallow, but I think it's reasonable. If you just fast forward 20 years or 30 years, how do you want your child to treat themselves? And who are they going to learn it from? So
I think that's the thing that has resonated over the years the most with me, because I'm not good at self-care. Like, I'm just not. It's just really hard for me. And I wasn't good at it before I had a child. I'm just going to be honest about that. And then I certainly didn't become good at it when my child was diagnosed with autism. That didn't go, oh, well, now it's an opportunity for self-care.
Probably the opposite.
Right? And yet, I think about that all the time now, because watching him as a 20-year-old, he just finished finals last night. Right? Amazing. And I see him dealing with stress and I go, oh, wish I could go back and re-legislate all of that and set the example. Instead, the example that he says that I showed him is how to power through when you've got a deadline. That's what I taught him.
And that's super valuable too, right? As long as it's balanced with other stuff too.
And it's not. So there we go.
Well,
but
we could do a whole separate episode some other time just on self-care for parents of autistic kids.
Can we do that?
Absolutely.
Because that's important.
That's worth a whole hour in itself.
Yes, and we've already got people sending in questions. I'm saying hello to Writing with Mike, and then we've got a bunch of questions. But I asked you to come today, and we are going to do Jargon of the Day.
Cool.
And Chris has been waiting for us patiently. So the Jargon term, and we've never done this before, this term, Compasionate ABA. And this is a term that's being used more and more. So let's take a look at what if you guys know and watch the show, we do Jargon of the Day all the time, and what we do is first we give an actual definition, which we usually get out of the Cooper Hayward. And Hayward has said that he would like to come on the show.
That would be so cool.
Right, and we've said that
he's a lot of fun.
He's
He's great.
super sweet.
But
often I give their definition, and then I make fun of it.
Yeah.
Because, you know, what else could you possibly do with it if you don't have a PhD in psychology? I'm sorry, I love you all, but it's not written for somebody who doesn't already have a degree.
Yeah.
So I often make fun of it and all the extra jargon that's in it. Then we give a working definition, and I try to give an example so that, you know, those of us who don't have that degree and all those letters after our name have a way of accessing something about what it means. Today's a little bit different because we have the expert here with us, and so I'm not going to make too much fun of the actual definition.
No, I don't mind. Go for it. I can take it.
Let's, and you're going to have to full screen it for me, Chris, because I'm not going to be able to read it. Okay, would you like to read it? Is that
okay? Sure.
All right,
sure.
You go right ahead. This is the actual definition.
Yeah, so this is the definition that we've been working on, and we published a paper over the summer that really laid this out in a scientific journal. And what we're saying is compassion involves empathizing with another human being's suffering and then engaging in overt behavior that's aimed at alleviating that human being's suffering. So 2 parts. First, empathize, then do something about it. Oops, there I am. I'm de-jargoning it already. Oops.
Yeah, don't do it.
Okay, don't do it. And so let's define that a little bit more. So what does alleviating suffering mean? From a behavior analytics standpoint, in the ABA world, alleviating suffering means helping a human being decrease the extent to which their behavior and their life is influenced by negative reinforcement and punishment. So have less of an influence on your life from negative reinforcement and punishment. And so when you think about it, ABA then could be more compassionate or less compassionate, depending on how much we're oriented toward minimizing aversive experiences for our clients and the families we serve, both in the short term and the long term.
Okay, I sort of almost kind of get it, maybe around the edges. What jumps out at me is, you know, create less suffering.
Yes.
And that ABA, because people get very confused about what ABA is.
Yeah.
But if I just think of it as a teaching tool,
Yeah.
that what I love about that definition is that it acknowledges that you could use it in a way. Anybody could take a teaching tool and make somebody's life miserable with it.
Absolutely.
You could if you chose to do that. But the other is also available too.
Right.
And that Compasionate ABA says, let's make it that. Okay. So if you got a little lost in the definition, though, take a hug from me, because how long have I been doing this? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I know what overt means, but the minute you throw in it's a $10 word and I go click and I turn off. So there, I did make a little bit of fun of it. Okay, so now let's go to the working definition, and then we're going to give examples. So nobody leave, we're not done. So I'll let you go ahead and do the working definition.
Okay, so just to try to put it into plain English so it makes sense, is compassion involves sharing the suffering of our clients, so feeling it in the moment when they're having distress, and then taking action to alleviate that suffering. So doing something about it. So we notice that let's say an autistic child that we're working with, if he's in distress, we actually feel some of that distress in the moment. And then we don't just feel it and bury it, we make a choice to do something on the outside, overt behavior. Or you could just say take action to alleviate that human being suffering right then in that moment. And also balancing that with long-term concerns as well. And so we'll talk more about that. But important to note that it's a functional definition, which means it depends on what actually does alleviate suffering for that autistic person. So let's say, I might, with my neurotypical, social standards or whatever, I might think giving you a hug or patting your back might alleviate your suffering, or maybe talking to you about your emotions in the moment might make you feel better. And if it does, great, then that meets the definition. But if that doesn't alleviate your suffering, it doesn't matter how nice it looks to me or to anybody else, it could actually be uncompassionate, maybe making you more uncomfortable by making you talk about your feelings, or by trying to give you a hug when you want to be left alone. And so it's really radically functional, that we're helping the person in a way that they want to be helped, and so we're centering what they care about, their voice, their preferences, and we're centering their emotional experience of the world, not what we think it should be. We're not what we're trying to teach them. Well, that's not neurotypical. That's not an appropriate emotional expression. None of that.
Right.
It's like, how are you actually feeling in the moment, and how can I make it better for you from your perspective?
Okay, and I think there was more on the slide, Chris. If you would Okay, I think you pretty much got it. Compassion is about centering
the type of comfort that the client wants from their perspective. And that's going to be different for each human being, and it's going to be different even from day to day. So it's about us being really sensitive to the emotional status of the client.
Yeah.
And if you go back to the Cooper book,
yes,
it's not in there. There is nothing about emotional, like being okay, emotional well-being. That's not stated in like traditional standard ABA, and that's a problem. And people in the autistic community have been telling us that it's a problem, and it's time for us in the ABA community to acknowledge that and do better.
Yeah, there is a part of me that goes, but isn't that always the base of everything? But I understand why we need to define this. I get it. And it's hard for me because I feel like that my child did have compassionate ABA.
Yeah.
Maybe not 100% of the time. There were times when we had to go, hey, let's look at this and whatever, and redo a moment.
Yeah.
But I go back to the model of, because I was a school teacher.
Yeah.
You know, and that people get off track on a daily basis when they're teaching. When they're well-intentioned and they can get off track.
Of course.
It's very important in all walks of life.
Yeah, not just ABA.
That we evaluate what we're doing.
Yes.
Right? Going, is it working? Am I on mission? Right?
Yes.
Over and over and over again. So sometimes it's shocking to me because I go, well, of course it should always be compassionate. But I get that there are people who are saying that they had ABA that wasn't. Yeah,
and honestly, you were pretty lucky. You had some pretty amazing people on your child's team, like people like Peter Farrig, where he's just all heart. Like he's not going to treat a human being poorly. He just doesn't have it in him. And so he figured out how to motivate your son through fun and through adventure and through play and through you know, theatrical just engagement. You know, and so that worked. But you know. You could easily have had other folks on your team that really wouldn't or didn't know how to motivate your son through fun and through play. And at the end of the day, the traditional approach has been the kid has to do what they have to do. They have to comply. And so if they're not willing to, we're going to make them. And that was practiced for decades in ABA.
Well, and I won't say that we didn't have anybody who was like that, but they didn't survive very long on our team. And I fired people. And,
but you were a very powerful self-advocate. Not all parents are.
Well, but I think that's part of the reason why we need to educate parents.
I agree, yeah.
And that's why what you're doing with is it called Stand?
Stand, yeah.
Stand. I think that that's important because anytime a parent is empowered, look, if you have knowledge, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
And I always felt like I didn't know what I was doing, but I guess the lens that I was going through from the beginning before I decided to start ABA, because I'd heard bad things about ABA. I said, you know, his sense of self has to be preserved. I don't want anybody ever telling him he's wrong. You know, like and if really somebody did, if somebody did, I immediately went, hey, you know, and I was in the other room listening on the baby monitor.
Well, some of the older forms of ABA literally were designed to tell the kid they're wrong. Like that was a lot of what you did. No, wrong. You know, and then you go on to the next teaching thing. And I like honestly, those procedures were designed. They weren't designed with the thought of the first thing I need to do is preserve this human being's dignity and autonomy. That was not the first thing. What they were thinking was well, that's because you're you.
Well, because you know, I think that's just like how
it should be obvious.
Yeah, it should be obvious.
And it should be obvious for special educators, and it should be obvious for psychologists and SLPs and OTs and everybody, right? But the truth is, it's not. And people with disabilities have faced discrimination and bias forever since the beginning of time. And I think that that's part of it. Is that you can use. It's the assumption that you're allowed to use procedures that are a little bit less ethical and a little bit more forceful with people with disabilities because we know better than them. I mean, it's an ableist bias that's been present across our society, not just ABA, forever.
So for the parents, like, you know, I see Writing with Mike says, I wish we could get ABA because I know they've been waiting for a long time to get it. But for parents who are starting and say, okay, I want to do ABA, and you should have access in the United States to ABA, right? You should have funding in the United States, and you should have access. And I think that, you know, I'm always saying to people, if you pay for insurance and they're telling you that there isn't anybody, please call them and say that it's a denial of access to care.
Right, yeah.
So that they will give you a provider maybe that's outside their network, but they have to provide. You can't keep paying premiums and then say we don't have any. They're legally required. And the phrase is denial of access to care. Please call your insurance company today. If you have been waiting more than 3 months, call them today and say that. Okay, but if, for people who are hearing this and go, well, wait a second, maybe I'm going to get that ABA where they're going to tell him he's wrong. What advice do you give them to make sure that they get the good ABA, the compassionate ABA?
Yeah, I would definitely advise them to ask their BCBA, their child's BCBA, how are you going to make sure that my child feels emotionally safe and secure during all ABA sessions? How are you looking out for my child's emotional well-being? And honestly, I hate to be pessimistic, but for a lot of BCBAs, that'll be the first time anyone's ever asked them that.
Really?
Yes, and they might say, I don't know. But then that's great. You can say, okay, great, here's your opportunity to learn more. Here's your opportunity to go back to your clinical director and check in on that. And I want to know. And so there are behavior analysts who've even been taking data on child emotion for 20, 30 years. It's called, see, of course we have to jargon everything, indices of happiness. And literally it's taking data on like, is the person smiling or laughing, or are they crying or frowning or grimacing? And so that we can be responsible for that. We can document, is the person feeling okay and feeling safe during these sessions? You know, ask about stuff like that, and just say like, I'm not okay with my child not feeling safe. Like the number one condition is during every single ABA session, my child needs to feel safe and loved and cared for. That's the prerequisite. If you can't make my child feel safe and loved and cared for, you don't have any business implementing the next discrete trial. Like you're not ready to do it.
Okay, but then we get into, let's talk a little bit about ACT.
Sure.
Because when I went through ACT training, one of the big things, aha moment for me, was recognizing that sometimes I have two very powerful values and they're going like this.
Sure, yeah.
And that one very powerful value for a lot of autism parents is I want my child to be safe.
Yeah.
Boom, that's a big one. But on the other hand, I want my child to learn things and eventually be independent. And man, they go boom, 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 like this.
Absolutely. Although I have to say, let's say I was helping you with one of your most difficult behavioral challenges. You can think whatever you want in your head right now. But let's say, personally. What if I was your coach?
Right.
And it would require some really significant discomfort from you to face that challenge and to change your behavior.
Yeah.
You could probably think of something right now. Well, none of us are perfect, right? We're all on a journey, right?
Gosh, yeah.
So the difference is, would I be forcing you to do it, or would I be holding your hand, looking you in the eyes and saying, we got this, we can do this together?
Yeah.
Would I be inspiring you to do it and making sure that you feel safe and still pushing you?
Yeah.
And maybe you're still going to even cry out of distress.
Right.
And you're going to be scared, you're going to be shaking, you're going to be terrified, but you're going to choose to walk through that door because you feel safe and supported.
And we can do that even with nonverbal children.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because a nonverbal child knows when they feel safe, they know when they feel loved. They might not be able to put it into words, but you know, it doesn't take words to feel emotions, and it doesn't take words to know. I mean, it's a basic mammal thing of move away, move towards, you know.
Yeah. Well, I always quote Dr. Grampiche because her thing is always, it has to be fair.
Yeah,
And
that's a good,
for me, that's like, oh, I understand what fair looks like.
Yeah.
There are a whole lot of other things I don't understand, but I understand what fair looks like. It has to be fair. And what you're saying is it would have to be, even though I'm doing something difficult, it would have to be fair to me.
Yeah, like you want it, it's worth it, you choose it. And the truth is if these kids see the ABA therapists or the RBTs, whatever we call them these days, if they see them as partners and if they have a trusting relationship with them, and when they walk through the door, they get excited and they run towards them, of course they're going to work hard for them. Of course they're going to learn stuff. They want to, right? But if they see them as like, you know, people who are going to force them to do stuff they don't feel safe or comfortable with, they're going to want to run the opposite direction. They're not going to be motivated to learn.
Which is rational on their part.
Of course.
We should not be poo-pooing that
And if
at
they
all.
had the words to say like, I'm not sure about this, why are you making me do this? I'm not okay with this. we'd be acting different. Like RBTs would act different. They would stop. They'd say, oh, okay, hang on a second. What should we do differently, right?
Yeah.
And then, okay, even if these kids do get forced through all these procedures they're not comfortable with, but then they develop the language, 20 years later, they then tell the whole community, I wasn't comfortable with that. You didn't have to make me do that. You could have like made me feel safe and,
Yeah, and we are at that tipping point.
I think we are.
We have adults that were nonverbal and are now verbal.
Lots.
and who have things to say. I will say that a lot of people don't have a whole lot of memories from the early time.
Sure, yeah.
Because, I have come to understand that, our brains categorize things once we have more language.
Sure,
so that we can retract them, and find the memory.
Yeah, makes
But
sense.
we have lots of people that tell us, I didn't like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's valuable information to know.
Really valuable, yeah.
And there's also the other side of it too. There were things that I was worried about with Jem. I always tell the story about, we used to do the show called The A Word, and I was watching one of the first episodes of it, and the little boy was crying, and then the mom was standing outside the door crying, and Jem came up and said, why are you crying? And I said, I'm crying because I remember what that felt like. And he said, did you stand outside the door and cry when I was crying? And I said, of course. And he said, why? Why were you crying because I was crying? And I said, because I don't ever want you to be in distress. And he said, that little boy is frustrated. Nobody ever died from frustration. Mom.
All right,
and
very good.
And he was like 10 when he said this to me, and he said, frustration is just a signal that things are about to change.
Interesting, yeah. Well, he has a lot of wisdom, and I think he had a really good experience, and so
yes,
it makes sense that he
You're
sees
right.
it
I
that
was
way.
lucky. I was
Yeah.
incredibly lucky, and
well, and you made sure that he had that through your behavior, through
well,
your
I also,
actions.
I
And I
worked
remember.
hard. I worked hard, but I also got very lucky. I mean, look at
Yeah.
me. You were part of the team. I had an amazing team of people that were doing amazing things.
I also remember that you were willing to act in a way that made other people feel uncomfortable sometimes. And I don't know if you said that out loud or thought that out loud, but that was the truth.
I mean,
I think that was really valuable.
I always say to people, I was a squeaky wheel, and I assumed that you all hated me. I assumed that.
I never heard anything like that, but I do remember hearing like, yeah, man, she's intense,
Well, and I was surprised when I got
that's
offered
good.
a job when my kid graduated, because I thought, oh my gosh, I thought you were all going to throw a party. One of my first interactions with you, you probably don't remember. You were going to do the study about the oxygen, the
Oh,
HVAC,
yeah,
and I was refusing it. I was refusing to be a part of the study, and you
okay.
came to talk to me, and I said, because you guys were going to do a study to see, because everybody was saying it was so effective,
Right.
and you were going to take kids into tanks and do therapy with them in the tanks. And I was saying I was only going to allow him to go in a tank if you could guarantee that the BT had not been smoking or was in different clothes, and I was willing to get other clothes.
Yeah.
And you were like, lady, that we can't make that happen. And I went, then we're not going to be a part of it.
Yeah,
and I thought,
good for you.
he thinks I'm a whack-a-noodle.
But look how much our culture has changed. These days, of course, it's so disgusting. Like, I can't even imagine being in a small space with someone who
wasn't
just
gonna do
smoked. No way.
I was concerned that it was going to cause more damage than not.
Well, and even just behaviorally, even just psychologically, it stinks. Why would you want your kids stuck in a confined space doing hard tasks with a horrible smell,
And you were very professional. You were like, I totally understand and whatever. And I was like, oh, I'm sure we missed out on something. And then your study showed that it didn't make a difference.
Work. It just didn't work.
But I always like to say that was with soft shell tanks. That was not with hard shell tanks. That study has not been done.
Yeah, as far as I know. I haven't followed the research in a while. So
No, but that study has not been done. Anyway, I have some questions from people.
Great,
People have
love it.
written in a lot of different things. Okay, so Susie B said, my son is down to eating 2 foods. We are considering a feeding specialist. Every time he gets sick, which is quite often, he stops eating and doesn't return to his regular appetite. He says his food is yuck. He's 9 years old and is currently attending FSFK in Alhambra for ABA.
Yeah. First Steps for Kids. Yeah, cool.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Alhambra, great. Yeah, I'm familiar with those folks. Well, she's very lucky because there are resident experts at First Steps who are very, very talented at helping kids with feeding challenges. And so that's something that if she asks her child's program director or BCBA to focus on that, maybe they already are, but if she specifically asks for that you want renewed focus on that, there are other experts in the organization that BCBA can consult with and get trained by.
Wonderful.
And I can help out too.
Okay,
So,
there you go.
Great.
Writing with Mike says, our son only eats 3 foods, and we've started feeding therapy to see how it goes. And they started talking to each other, which is wonderful, and she asked, where is he going for feeding therapy? So they've had that whole conversation. And you guys are in different states. So let me fast forward down to here.
Do you know what state he's in by any chance?
The second one is in Arizona.
Okay.
You guys don't have offices in Arizona?
No.
But they already have feeding therapy in Arizona.
Okay, good.
Okay. And so there was I thought it was lots and lots of questions, but I love when our viewers start talking to each other and sharing
it's a
resources
community. That's so
with
cool.
each other. So I guess my question about Compasionate ABA is, where do we fall on intensity?
Yeah, so that should not be affected either way by taking a compassionate approach. The only way that would be really relevant is if the intensity made the client or the family's experience of ABA substantially more aversive. So, for some families, it is really hard to do 30 hours, let's say.
Yeah.
And so if the BCBA was saying, well, that's what's recommended by the research, so that's what you need to do, and we're done having the conversation, that's not the most compassionate approach to that, But if the BCBA acknowledges, wow, it actually is kind of aversive for this family to dedicate this many hours to it. They're exhausted, they're trying to do all these other things that are important to their family, how do they manage the schedule? And then the BCBA takes overt action to engage with the parents to change something, to make that experience less aversive. That would be an example of the BCBA taking a more compassionate approach, as opposed to a less compassionate approach would be, well, just deal with it. Sorry, this is what the science says your kid needs.
Well, and then there's the flip side of it, which I see all the time, which is people saying, okay, your prescription is for 30 hours, and the parents say, well, that's going to be really hard for us to do, so we'll only do 15, and then the BCBA says, okay.
All the
and
time.
I don't feel that that's compassionate either.
Yeah, right.
Because I don't think that parent knows.
Yes.
It's like saying, okay, you're in a game show.
Yeah.
And if, I'm going to ask you to do this one thing that's going to be difficult, but if you do, you're going to win $1 million.
Right.
But then you say it's going to be really difficult,
Yeah.
and you go, well, then I'm not going to do it, and nobody told you that there was $1 million for doing it.
Yeah, and so that's why our definition of compassion includes both short-term and long-term distress.
Yes.
So in the short term, maybe the easier thing for that parent is to tell them, okay, no problem, 15 hours a week, right? Because that's minimizing their short-term distress. But if their child makes less gains and is able to access less of the community, is able to develop less functional communication, maybe still has some challenging behavior, has long-term outcomes that are even more distressing, then you're right, that's not compassionate to just let that happen because you don't want to deal with a short-term difficulty, right? And so our definition of compassion is that we always need to balance both short-term and long-term, and we can't ever just use short-term as an excuse to ignore long-term or use long-term as an excuse to ignore short-term. So a classic thing we used to do a lot in the ABA field was think about the long-term consequences and say, well, then that justifies doing anything that we have to right now. We'll put the kid through hell if we have to right now because we want this future for them that's really important. And I get where we were coming from when we did that. We were coming from the right place. But if we're only focusing on that, then that could justify doing things in the moment that really aren't okay and that aren't in the kid's best interest in the moment. And so it's about balancing both. And so for a family like that, I think it would make sense for the BCBA to have the really difficult conversation. That in the moment, that having that conversation is going to increase distress, both for the parent and for the BCBA, right?
Yeah.
But it's about how do we have this conversation in a way that's supportive and listen and really understand, try to see it from the parent's perspective. Don't try to deny it or explain it away or avoid it. Try to really engage that parent with where they're coming from, and then say, okay, what can we do about it? Coming from that place.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree. I mean, if the research is clear on intensity, and clinically, if the clinical judgment of the BCBA is, this kid has a lot that they could learn if we get the intensity high enough, that could really help. then yeah, we can't avoid just having that conversation just because the parent isn't interested or doesn't want to. We have to do both.
I feel so strongly about this because I see all the time that people are choosing to do the 15, and that what happens is it's still stressful to do 15 hours of ABA.
It's still really
stressful.
hard, yeah.
and that what happens is you just keep circling the drain. And the example I always give people is that I used to have to do payroll, and I would only have to do it once every 2 weeks. And I would have to log in and remember that password once every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I would have to know which button to click and which thing to do. And it was always stressful, and it would take me way longer. And everybody would say, but you'll get used to it. But because it was once every 2 weeks, if I'd had to do it every day for 2 weeks, I would have had it. I would have had it. And then it wouldn't have been stressful for me. But I just couldn't get enough. So I kept cycling the drain on it because I wasn't having to do it every day. And I think about that all the time with these kids who are only getting 15 hours, which is just enough to get frustrated and not break through.
I agree with that. And especially when a 15-hour program, sometimes they're designed just like a 30-hour program or a 40-hour program, but you only have 15 hours of time to work on it. So you're working on way too many skills where it's basically hopeless. There's no way you're going to master all of this stuff. But it's like, well, this is what we do in ABA. I guess we have to just teach a million skills. Rather than focusing on, if we really did only have 10 or 15 hours, period, we better focus on the stuff that really matters. It's going to be really transformative for that family.
But for me, the thing that I'm always saying to parents is, what's on your list?
Right.
What are the things that you want for your child? And everybody always says some version of communication. I want. A lot of times people say, I want spoken language. I want him to be able to answer questions. I want her to be able to say, I want this, whatever. And language, if you think about it, if I want to learn Russian and I sign up today and say, I want to learn Russian, how many hours?
Lots.
I cannot expect that I'm going to be able to do that in 15 minutes a day.
No, in fact, the only really best way to do it is to move to the country and don't talk to anyone that speaks English, which means it's 24 hours a day learning for a year.
So if you want your child to be able to learn language, then I'm always saying to people, think about how many hours that takes and how many hours are you willing to devote to that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Mike says we're just on a waiting list for ABA again. Mike, I hope you call them today and say denial of access to care. The Autism Journey with Elijah says, what would you suggest us doing until we get ABA into place? Home, in public school, etc.
Oh my, yeah, I feel like it's impossible for me to make recommendations that are specific enough, but I do think getting plugged into some acceptance and commitment training resources can be really transformative. So probably the best single book to read is called The Reality Slap by Russ Harris. The Reality Slap by Russ Harris. It costs $15, I think, and it's easy to read, and it makes a lot of sense, and it really empowers families with tools to handle their own stress and to not just sort of feel better, but to get busy, to choose specific behaviors that they can do each day that moves them towards what they really care about most in their family for that day or that week. So check that out. And then there are some really good resources on basic parent training stuff that's ABA focused, but it's not a substitute, obviously, for a real program, but it can be empowering still.
And yes, I'm sorry, I'm reading questions from people. I think I wish that your STAN program, you need to get it in more than California.
I know. The rationale behind that was a big piece of the program is connecting families with resources that are directly relevant to them. And so a lot of it is like regional center and California state insurance laws and things like that. So it made sense. And it's for research studies. We're trying to kind of control the parameters of it to some extent. But that is the plan, is to roll this out more broadly. We got to publish the research first. To show, yes, this works, it moves the needle for parents. And then the plan is to roll it out more broadly.
Absolutely. Because I see Autism Journey with Elijah, I see that you say that you're looking into doing gymnastics, homeschooling, and other services, but ABA for us is the most important thing besides other services like OT, speech, feeding, PT, and thank you so much. And, if we just look at studies about what's most effective, it's clear. And that is why insurance pays for ABA, is because you're going to get a much bigger bang And of course, we know that the more intensity you do that, the bigger the bang you have the potential to find. It's different for everybody.
Right. Different
we
for
don't want
everybody.
to say across the board anything. You were going to give the example. One of the things we talked about was the toothbrushing. So let's talk about what compassionate ABA looks
Great.
like, and let's talk about it with the context of brushing teeth.
Okay, so, and this really ties in the short-term versus long-term thing.
Okay.
So if you only cared about short-term distress and short-term comfort, and your child hates brushing their teeth, and they're crying, and they're scared, and they're frustrated, the best thing to do, if you only cared about short-term, the best thing to do would be to say, okay, no big deal, you don't have to brush your teeth, right?
Right.
And on any given day, that decision is actually okay, right? It doesn't actually make a difference if you do it just one day, right? But then if you do it the next day, and the next day, and the next day, we all know what happens, right? And so then the long-term consequences for this kid are losing their teeth, and tooth decay, and oral problem, pain, not being able to chew their food. Like, clearly that's not more compassionate, obviously not, right? And so older approaches to ABA, and I know some parents have resorted to this too, is if you're only thinking about the long term, then you just force the kid. And sometimes it gets down to like pinning the kid down and just forcing the toothbrushing, and the kid's crying and sputtering and toothpaste is flying everywhere. And the parent wants to cry because they hate, why am I doing this? I hate this. The kid is, right? And so that's not okay either, obviously, right? And so it's about balancing both short-term and long-term, saying, I am not going to give up on my kid's oral health. I'm not going to do it. And also saying, I am not willing to pin my kid down and make them have one of the worst experiences of their life for 5 minutes to brush their teeth. I'm just not going to do it. And so we have to balance both. And so if the parent doesn't know what to do, they got to ask their BCBA, and don't settle for just escape extinction, which just escape extinction means the kid can't escape, they just have to do it. So you just make them do it. That's not okay, it's not good enough. And so what that might look like, it's gonna be different for every kid. But the cool thing about ABA is we have like 100 years of research on tiny adjustments and tiny details and procedures that can really make things better. And there's all kinds of jargon for each one of those. But the basic idea is make it easier, make it less scary, make it more fun, more positive reinforcement, make it worth it. And so step one might be literally just showing the kid the toothbrush for 1 second. Look, toothbrush, here's your huge positive reinforcer. Whatever your favorite thing in the universe is, now you get to go do it. Do that 3 times in a row. If we have smiling and no running away and screaming, now step 2 might be, I'm going to show you the toothbrush for 2 seconds, okay? And then step 3 might be like, I'm going to hold it close to your face, but you don't even have to touch it, right? But you don't graduate to the next step until they're successful at the current step, they're smiling, they're laughing, they're getting their big reinforcer. That's how you know it's time to move on. And so a reasonable concern might be, well, that will take forever, right? And yeah, maybe it will. And maybe you need to dedicate 10 minutes a day, every day, and when you're not late for school, let's say, right? And when you're not late for bed, right? But dedicate 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day to really gradually, calmly working on this process. And then maybe 6 months from now, the kid's just smiling, brushing their teeth. Okay, I did it, Mommy. Give me my reinforcer. You know, and we have research that has produced that outcome, that exact outcome, without ever having to force the child to do it. Never. And so, families, if they're interested, they can. I'm happy to send them the article and then also the specific steps that we did. It'll still work better if you have a BCBA, like help you through that process. But honestly, it's not rocket science. The main thing is, don't force the kid, and don't move on to the next step until they're totally solid at the current step. It's a lot like how we reduce fear, like to spiders, let's say. Desensitization, it's a lot like that. Really, really slow, really gradual, and positive, not forced, not manipulated, but like the child has to want to choose to engage the process.
We had a parent 2 weeks ago write in to ask Dr. Doreen and say, I'm having a hard time getting my child out of the car into the house after school. And we asked a lot of different questions, and Dr. Grampiche said, what is the reinforcer for coming into the house? Like sometimes we just forget.
Sure.
You know? And what was amazing was last week the mom wrote back and said, oh, I offered him 2 mini marshmallows and he's happy to come into the house.
There you go.
And you know, it's one of those moments for me where I was like, oh gosh, like all that pain, however many weeks she was having a hard time getting him out of the car, and 2 mini marshmallows made it fair. And you just go, oh, can I just look at everything that way? Can I stop for a second and think about what's the hardest time of day and what's the pushback that I'm getting. It made me think about, there was a period of time that we were living in a condo that you had to park across the street, and it was like cars would fly by, and we'd actually had a kid get hit by a car.
Oh my gosh.
And getting out of the car, when I would pick Jem up from school and getting him out of the car and his book bag and my bag and everything, really difficult. And I was always like watching the cars go by and everything, and panicked, right? And he would always do it so slowly. And I would be like, can you please hurry?
Just go.
Can you please get out of the car? And then I worked on it with him in a parking lot, like, here's how we're gonna get out of the car, here's how you're gonna listen to mommy, like all these different things. And I was like, and you gotta do it this way. You gotta take this, pick up your bag, like all this craziness, right?
Yeah.
And then I remember the day that he just wasn't doing it fast enough, and I was panicking because I could see a car turning and I was worried. And I said, I just need you to do it this way. And he said, do you have autism? And I said, what? And he goes, well, why do you need it one way? Why can't it
It's a pretty fair question.
Why can't it be another way? And I just sometimes we get so entrenched in what we're thinking that it's hard to just like for a moment go, okay, but wait a second.
Yeah.
This is what's going on for me. What's going on for him?
Right. And I have to say, like, the neurodiversity movement has really taught me a lot about this, because, we think things like, why can't you just get out of the car? Just hurry up. How hard is it, right? Or why can't you just brush your teeth? What's the big deal, right? And from a neurodiversity standpoint, actually, no, maybe that is how much support an autistic person needs to learn that particular skill, or to deal with that particular transition, or to experience that particular sensory input, or whatever it is. Maybe it just is that hard or that scary. And you could apply the same thing to, learning disabilities. Like, well, why does this kid with dyslexia need such special instruction?
Right.
Well, maybe that's what they need to be successful, or someone with anxiety or depression. Well, why do they need all this special time with a therapist? Well, maybe that's what they need to be,
Yeah.
Maybe we need to just be a little more flexible, and maybe it will take 6 months to learn to brush teeth, or maybe whatever the case is. I mean, loud noises, feeding is a classic thing. Like, come on, kid, just eat the food, right? And more old school approaches were just escape extinction. You just have to eat it. You force the kid to eat it. And I'm just not willing to do anything like that anymore. I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah.
Well,
I was never willing to do that. Okay. Autism Journey with Elijah says, we have our son brush his teeth at night. He is not having it in the morning. We do not push him, but he is getting used to it little by little. We are hoping that this will lead into morning and night brushing. His tablet is a game changer for a reward.
Great, yeah, fantastic.
Wonderful.
Fantastic. And for things like that, it's like, well, he shouldn't need a tablet for 15 minutes just for brushing his teeth. Maybe he does. Maybe that's what works. And so maybe we all got to wake up 15 minutes earlier, and that's uncomfortable for all of us. But if that's the accommodation that helps the person be successful, and people are happy and like experiencing some joy or some fun when interacting as a family, that is so much better than nagging and grouching and screaming and rushing and relayed and being antagonistic with each other.
Yeah. You used to always say, there has to be joy and there has to be happiness. Otherwise, what is the point?
Yeah.
And that's something my dad used to always say. That always resonated with me when you would say that. Because especially, I used to perform as an actress, and I would do all this work. You're in rehearsal for so long. And it was my ritual that I would always call my dad before opening night.
That's
and my dad would always say to me, he wouldn't say break a leg. He would say have fun.
Oh.
And he would say, because what's the point?
Yeah.
If you went through all of that work and you don't now have fun.
I love it.
And then when you would say that about, autism, I would be like, oh, right. Right, because what is the point of the whole thing? We all want to enjoy our children.
Yeah.
Yes, we're panicked and nervous about what their life is going to be like and missing the boat and all the things, but there is a way that we can be helping them and having fun and finding the joy. In fact, that's the only way.
I think so. And if you think about it from a motivation standpoint, if we're not taking that approach, what are we teaching these kids? We're teaching them that interacting with other human beings like adults or authority figures or whatever, or teachers or parents, is a source of like coercion and frustration and like you just have to do it, just get it over with. We don't want them to learn that. I mean, the whole point of what we do is helping autistic people connect with human interaction as a source of joy and comfort, so that they can do it when they want it. Not because they have to be neurotypical, but when they find that as a source of warmth and joy, that they can access that.
Well, and remember when there was the big thing was the tiger mom, right?
Yeah.
And what we discovered with the tiger mom is that the kids grow up and leave and never come back and don't want to have anything to do with that parent.
Why would that be any different with autistic kids?
Yes, no, it would not be different. Sarah wants to know, I need advice on how to deal with the fear of braces.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That's a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, for anybody. Yeah. Braces are really difficult.
It's why my teeth are crooked, because I could never, like I was like, you're going to put that in my mouth and I'm going to lose my mind.
Yeah, and they're so uncomfortable. Even once you even if you get over the fear and you get them in your mouth, then they're really uncomfortable.
I can't even. I didn't. I have crooked teeth. So how do we do that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is out of my area of expertise. I haven't tried it, but for sure the same basic approach of baby steps, make it fun, make it positive. Unfortunately, like give the kid the opportunity to choose to engage versus not, which is kind of hard because it's not really the kid's choice, right, to get braces or not, but set up the experience in a way to where they have some autonomy and some agency in the process. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have any really good advice for that.
I will tell you that braces have changed a lot in the intervening years, and now they have those places that don't do braces, that do it a little bit later with adults. And sometimes you have to go and get a tooth pulled to make room, but they have the 3D printed mouthpieces that you put in that change it ever so slightly over the course of 6 months. And that they, I don't know, I haven't done it, but I certainly have considered it.
I think they're quite a bit more user-friendly. The only problem is you have to take them out and brush your teeth after every single time you eat, and so that might be hard for some kids.
I think you wait and do it later when they're teenagers or adults.
Okay, I'm not sure.
So you bypass the brace, which is hard because you want to get that done, at a certain time and age and whatever. But I'm just saying there are different ways of doing braces now.
There are, and it's worth noting that if a situation is sort of over the top challenging, then it may well be worth doing over the top support and reinforcement. And so, and I think that's generally true. But I'm just thinking of one of my own daughters. She was really struggling with math homework for a while and really genuinely hated it to the point where she was like tearing up during math homework. And I thought she doesn't need edible reinforcers. That's like stupid, basically, to give her an edible reinforcer. And then my second thought was, actually, she really loves candy. It really brings her joy and happiness. Why don't I just try giving her some gummy bears and just see what happens? And like her face lit up. She smiled. She ate a gummy bear. And I gave them to her for free as long as she was trying to do the homework. She didn't have to get it right. She didn't have to be perfect. It was just like, I'm going to try to engage this process. And then, cool, let's share some gummy bears. And it produced more smiles and less crying. Okay, why not? Who cares,
Making it fair.
Making it fair.
Making it fair. I will say to you, though Dr. Temple Grandin turned me on to Khan Academy. Have you done Khan Academy with her?
No, but what I have her involved in is Fit Learning, which is precision teaching, one-on-one coaching, and it's incredible. She's doing great and having fun and loving it.
For me, Jem loved Khan Academy, but I loved Khan Academy because I am not a math person. And so he would come home with fractions in the new math, and I don't understand it. And so I would Google it, but then I found I could find a video on Khan Academy that explained it to me.
That's great.
So that I wasn't putting my head down and crying.
That's awesome.
Okay, so we're almost out of time here, and I appreciate everybody for being here, and I appreciate you. And I think I do have to bring you back to talk about self-care.
Self-care for parents.
But let's just recap a couple of things for people who've come in at the end. Tell them briefly the 1-minute description of Stand and where they would go, and we'll include in the comments on the podcast where to go.
So they can Google Autism Family Support Lab at USC, University of Southern California, Autism Family Support Lab at University of Southern California, and they'll find a link to the study there. But it's an 8-week program. It's all on Zoom for families of newly diagnosed kids living in the state of California. They meet on Zoom 1 hour per week for 8 weeks. And it'll connect parents with resources for how to get connected with treatment supports and ABA, et cetera. parent training on basic behavior management and communication training skills for their kids. And then acceptance and commitment training skills to help with their own distress and cope with their own stress, as well as connecting parents with each other, because it's a parent support group as well. So we're trying to do a lot of things all at once, but it's basically all the key ingredients that we think parents really, really need from the beginning, right when they get diagnosed. And this program was designed with input from a lot of folks, from the autistic community, from the parent community, from the practitioner community. You helped us out a little bit. Do you remember that?
I do.
Which we really appreciate. You gave us some really valuable input. And so, yeah, we think so far, we've run a few cohorts so far, and families have had really positive feedback and really, really enjoyed the process. So we really would love folks to sign up. The next cohort starts in the beginning of February or maybe the end of January. So, and space is limited. Each cohort is only 4 to 6, so we keep it small.
Okay. And you've got how many books out?
Oh, I think 5, I think.
And so if people wanted to find your books, where would they go?
Jeez.
That's crazy that you have so many that you can't remember how many.
That
says something.
I'm trying not to be about the ego thing, counting things and stuff like that. But yeah, where would they go? They could email me, jtarbox@usc.edu.
Okay.
Yeah, if you put my name into Google or Google Scholar, a lot of my books are published with Elsevier. It's a major publishing company, so if you put in Tarbox and Elsevier book or something like that, or they could just email me, and I can connect them with books that might be relevant to the specific needs that their child has.
And I love and appreciate that you always try to take other people's perspective in terms of the jargon. You have been somebody the entire time I have known you that has said, if you can't explain it and put it in regular terms that aren't jargon, then you need to go back and learn more about what you're doing, and that's a thing that I respect so much. I wish that more of your colleagues would understand and get that.
I know.
Because when I will stop people and say,
it's a problem.
You need to explain that in a way that's less jargon, and they go, it's really difficult.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
well,
no,
it's
it
not an
really
excuse.
shouldn't be.
Yeah.
You didn't come out of the womb only knowing those words.
Right.
You're just gonna have to engage your brain.
And I'll say, it's literally in the competencies for the graduate students in our graduate program is explain it in technical terms and explain it in lay terms. You have to learn both. You cannot graduate from our program without learning both. So, but we're only producing 10 or 15 students a year. So.
But thank God you're doing that, because
it's
that
a
makes
priority.
a difference.
Yeah.
You're putting people out that get it and make a difference. I always enjoy seeing your students when I meet them, doing a paper session or something. It's clear that they're getting the mother stream from you.
Well, they do great work, and they really influence us. They push us to do better as professors, which is the best part.
That's amazing. And Lori says, the hour is over. I really enjoyed my time this morning. Thank you for sharing. And I agree,
Lori.
too. And did I forget anything else? You're doing so many things.
Yeah, I think that's the main stuff, right? Yeah.
Well, thank you for being mindful about making sure that it's compassionate.
Yeah, it's really important.
Because it should be.
It needs to be.
I wish it were a thing that we didn't even have to discuss, but apparently we do. So let's do it.
Yeah, and if we're willing to feel some discomfort, then we can do better in the future,
There we go.
And we don't need to defend our mistakes of the past. We can own them and move forward and be better and be stronger.
Well, I'm always thrilled to have time to spend with you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thank all of you for being here. Don't forget, tomorrow is the last show of the year. It's Ask Dr. Doreen, and you still have time if you want to send her a note to be included. I have one of these crazy boxes that you open it up and it flies everywhere.
Oh, that's awesome. I love it.
So
cool.
We're really looking forward to that. And if you want your note included so that it flies out, please send that to me, Shannon at autism-live.com. But get it to me within the next hour or two, because I got to wrap that thing. And it's
such a cool idea.
It's going to be a beast. So I'm so looking forward to it. All right. That's all the time we have for today. But thank you again. And thank you all of you for being here. And we'll see you tomorrow. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much. See you next time.